Welcome to Graying Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell. Before I tell you about today's guest, I want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Graying Rainbows at grayingrainbows.com. I also hope you'll subscribe in your favorite podcasting app and share the show with others. And of course, I'd love to hear your feedback. You can write to me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com or submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. My guest today is Jody Cole, founder of Wild Rainbow African Safaris. Jody and I first met in 2013 when a longtime fan of my podcast, Brain Science, invited me to go on safari in South Africa. Jody was actually the only American guide, and she also happened to be from Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I've lived for over 40 years. I think she's an amazing woman, so I'm really looking forward to letting her share her story with you. Hey, Jody.
Hi.
Yeah. So, Jody, you want to tell us, before we talk about your safari business, would you just tell us a little bit of your story? How did you get into this? It's a very unusual profession.
It's definitely not a common profession, no. The shortest version of the story is that I followed a dream that I really didn't know I had. I started going on to Africa in my mid-30s. A friend of mine, my dad had died in my early 30s, and I was a little lost in my life, and a friend of mine basically told me to get over myself, and as we say in the South, quit your belly aching. That's all one word, by the way. And start living my life and start living my dreams. And I don't need my dad's permission anymore. And the first thing that came to mind was, I haven't been to Africa. I'm going to go. So I organized a safari with a great company out of California, which is where I was living at the time. And I put together two of their trips back to back. And the first one was to South Africa. And the second trip was to Tanzania. That included climbing Kilimanjaro. And while I've been an athlete most of my life, climbing a mountain had never been part of my idea of how I would spend my athletic time. When I did that, it was January of 1998. So that was exactly 21 years ago when I started my adventuring to Africa. And I successfully summited Kilimanjaro and had a great time. And I came home a changed woman. I realized that I could say yes to my own dreams without having to ask anyone permission to do that. And I subsequently began going on my own one time a year, and the following year it was twice a year. And then a friend came to me and asked me to help her put together her 50th birthday safari. And having had no experience with anything like that, I said, well, let's put it together. So we did. And I said, there's one caveat, and that is, since this is your birthday, let's do this. We'll put the trip together. And then once the wheels of the plane hit the tarmac in Africa, I will be in charge and you'll be the birthday princess. Because I thought, well, I was raised in the South. I certainly have some sort of hosting skills, I hope. So off we went for 10 days in Tanzania, and 20 people joined us on that trip. And from there, we together started the company Wild Rainbow African Safaris because it was so successful. And we worked together for a year, and she realized, whoa, I'm too young to be working this hard. Jody, how about you take the company? I'm going to step out quietly and wish you the best. I have been off and running ever since, and that was 2004. So this year marks our 15th year.
So, Jody, before we talk about your safari business, do you mind sharing a little bit of your personal story with my listeners?
Sure, I don't mind at all. I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Was born in the 60s, so the bottom end of the baby boomers, and had a pretty charmed life. And I'd say a very comfortable life, too. Dad had a great job, good mom, and so on. And somewhere along the lines growing up as a young girl, I did feel a little bit different. And I remember there was some little rhyme or something that people would say. I was in elementary school, and it said something, had a line in it, something about lesbian friends. I remember that was kind of scandalous, and everybody would kind of giggle about lesbian friends. And I'm like, I didn't understand what that meant, but I just knew there was something off. It was worth giggling over. Fast forward to my early teens and coming of age, and I remember being close to certain girlfriends of mine and having that funny feeling in my stomach when we would have sleepovers, which is, young girls spend the night at each other's houses on a regular basis. I suppose boys do it too. But there would be a couple friends that I just always felt that little squiggly thing in our stomach. I don't know what else to call it. And then there was a friend in high school that I became particularly close to, and it ended up being my first experience with another girl, and I was madly in love. And the kind of love that we have as young people, it's all ending, all being, all doing, all consuming, all I could think about, all I wanted to do, and it was the best thing on the planet. And I remember thinking then, wouldn't it be great if we could get married someday? And I'm only saying that considering how far we've come today. And it wasn't until the marriage movement began that I remembered that I was feeling this about this person. I went away to college, and conveniently to a women's college, and that isn't why I went to a women's college. It just was the college that I wanted to go to because it provided better opportunities for me. I went to a great school in Spartanburg, South Carolina called Converse College. One of the best experiences of my entire life, and helped me develop as a young woman, which is really why I wanted to go. And it was there, of course, that I had some interesting experiences, but everything was always a secret and quiet, and alcohol always had to be included or a component there, because doing something completely sober, it was more difficult to justify the behavior. But if alcohol had been involved, well, I could just say we were drunk and we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah. What years were you in college?
I was in college from 1980 to 84.
So that was a time when everybody was really closeted.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, just before the AIDS crisis had begun, but I was becoming more and more clear about the fact that I think I'm gay, or I never liked the word lesbian, but that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. The word lesbian versus gay or queer, all those other monikers we use. I was still dating guys at the time, and I did the fraternity party things and tried to play the perfect heterosexual, all the while being a very stereotypical lesbian, meaning an athlete. And
I remember it well.
Yeah, and I actually mentioned it to a couple of my very, very close classmates. I think I'm a lesbian. And I was drunk when I did it. And I remember they would say to me, "Oh, Jody, you're so sweet. You're just one of the sweetest people we know. And of course you love all your friends." And, it's kind of like, now, they're there. You'll be fine tomorrow morning. It was never a threat. None of these friends ever came back to me and said, "Sorry, Jody," or left me as a friend. Only one did kind of remove herself from me. But at the time, everything was business as usual the next morning. But then there was this one college classmate of mine who she left college early, who actually is from Dothan, Alabama, and she left Converse early and went out west with we used to have something called the May Queen, May Court, and the senior May Queen of that year, the two of them ran off to San Francisco. And it was rather scandalous. And of course, to me, it was extremely titillating. And I remember after graduation, I moved to Atlanta. But really what I wanted to do was to get the heck out of town. While I was in college, George Wallace had been elected for his fourth, but technically his third. Lurleen was, we all know was kind of...
Right.
Right. So he had been elected governor of Alabama, and my father and I were not getting along very well. And I really think I was struggling with my sexuality for real. And I thought, I want to go to New York or San Francisco. But when my friend moved to San Francisco, that was it. By November of 1984, I had moved to San Francisco. And within no time, the AIDS crisis was happening. And Harvey Milk, I don't remember the exact date that he died, but it was very close to 1984. And just all sorts of gay things were really starting to percolate to the surface. And I knew I was in the right place, but I was still closeted at home. And I had a job. I was working for Merrill Lynch at the time as a budding stockbroker. And in public, I would see men, but I went home to my girlfriend. And then I eventually came out to my family, starting with my brother in a gay bar in San Francisco. I said, have you noticed that I haven't had any boyfriends and stuff? And he knew it was coming. He knew where I was headed. And he said, yes, I do. And I said, well, I just want you to know that I'm gay. And he reached across the table with his hand, and he took my hand and he said, Jody, I will love you no matter what. And I fell in love with my brother even more deeply that day. Just a really, really great guy. And then I had to go through the process of coming out to my parents. And my dad was a relatively prominent guy in Birmingham. When I came out to him, it wasn't pretty. And it really, I think, and this is all hindsight speaking right now, that for him, it was going to be a coming out process for him too. You know, how does he explain to his colleagues and friends that we grew up with and so on that his daughter is gay? But at the time, I took him to be a cold and unaffirming and expletives that I probably shouldn't use on the air here, but...
No, I'm trying to stick with the clean label so I can have my show in India.
Well, good. Then I won't use those horrible terms, but anyone listening could use their imagination. I just thought he was the worst man on earth. But I'll wrap it up by saying that I did meet an extraordinary woman. And at the time, San Francisco had just passed for the city and county of San Francisco something called a domestic partnership. And it was really only for employees of San Francisco at the time. And so Amelia and I agreed that she really wanted the paperwork of domestic partnership. And I wasn't comfortable with that at the time, but I said, I tell you what, let's have a ceremony. So we had what was popular in the early 90s, a commitment ceremony. And we invited God and everybody. And my parents came to that. She was a lawyer at a prominent law firm in San Francisco. My dad was around people that he understood, lawyers and people of that ilk, properly educated and so on. And it was a great weekend. But when he went back to Birmingham, he struggled again because, again, he was faced with having to come out of the closet on his own. But for me, that was really coming out to everyone because we sent everyone invitations in the family. And it was still, it was hard. But I had both of my feet solidly in who I am. I am Jody Cole. I am gay, and I am proud of that. And as they say, the rest is history.
You mentioned earlier about your father dying. So were you able to come to a good place with your father before he died?
That is the best question. Thank you for asking it. I would have never expected that would be the question, and it's actually the perfect question. And the reason is that when I first moved out to California, I had to do with George Wallace, and there's no way I was going to live in the state, and my father and I weren't getting on, and I needed to come out. So by the time my dad died, George Wallace was no longer governor. I was definitely gay, and my dad and I had reconciled everything. And I should also add here, which I know a lot of gays and lesbians struggle with, is alcoholism and drug addiction. Both of those are a part of my personal story. So I am, even though we're supposed to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, and film, I do think it's relevant here that I am in recovery. So how that is associated with my father is that my mother had died as a direct result of her alcoholism. And that is, at her death was when I began my serious drinking at the age of 14. So when my dad died, everything associated with all of it had been resolved as best as it could be. And when I got the call that Dad had died that morning, my shoulders came down from my ears. I was relaxed, and I said, thank God we finished all the stuff we needed to deal with. I had a great respect for him, and I loved him very much. And he took his own life. He had been diagnosed with emphysema and Alzheimer's and was not going to go down the road that he suspected he might be going down. So he took his own life, and I totally got it.
Do you have any advice for people who are, still in this struggle? Because I'm getting emails from people that still feel they can't come out, and it seems that worries about their family is usually at the very top of what's holding them back.
This answer, of course, is going to come from my own personal experience. I've seen, especially being in San Francisco, which is a bit of a bubble, very pivotal part of the LGBT community movement work. What is most important is that you live your life the way you need to live your life and the way you want to live your life, honestly, because there's an expression that we're only as sick as our secrets. And if we keep secrets, it's going to show up some way, and usually unpleasantly, in our own lives. And I believe that. So if coming out to your family is something that you're still struggling with at all ages, I've heard people talk about picking the easiest and most likely person to come out to first. Also have a counselor in your life, be that a best friend or a clergyman, a clergywoman, or a paid psychologist or therapist or someone to discuss all of this with. But the reason I suggest choosing someone who's close to the family or a family member, because I think once one of us has buy-in from one member of the family, we can link arms with how to move forward in coming out to the rest of the family.
That's a really good point, because you could get their perspective on, and I can see how that could be really valuable. My parents were already dead since I was 60. I mean, I have a niece who's gay, and so telling my sister, plus I got the, oh yeah, you're the last person to figure out that you're gay story from most of the people that I told. So I don't have any personal experience with this, but from talking to a lot of different people, it seems like another key that your story demonstrates is that it doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely not. Mm-mm.
And to not panic when things go bad at the beginning.
Well, that's a good point. Yes, don't panic, because things in life in general take time. There's also, since I brought up the whole recovery piece, there's an expression in recovery rooms, 12-step rooms, that once we begin our new life in recovery, be it drugs, alcohol, or the other isms that one can have, not to categorize being gay as an ism, okay? So I just want to make that clarification. But there's an expression that I use in the rest of my life. Once we begin our own recovery process, or for gay being gay, once we begin to accept that we are LGBT and so on, then our living who we are, the rest of the family or the rest of our world begins to move with us. That sounds a bit esoteric, but especially when it comes to coming out as lesbian or trans or queer or questioning whatever moniker most suits for who you are, people begin thinking about their relationship to this new information.
Rick Clemens from Life Uncloseted makes the point that, when you come out, it took you probably years to get to that point. So it's unfair to expect your family member to make that entire journey instantly. I mean, like you talked about your father's own coming out journey in a sense that really demonstrated that principle.
Yes. And that's why the couple that co-founded and really are the ones who helped the movement for PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, they understood that because they have a gay child, well, very much an adult now, but they understood that process. And that's what made them so great as leaders, because they understood exactly what you just said, is that the coming out process for whatever it is an individual is coming out for took them a lifetime to get to that point. So you need to understand that your child or friend or whatever, brother, needs to know, needs to hear you say, okay, I hear you, it's going to take me time. It's hard work.
I'm going to cut in here for just a moment to remind you that you can help Graying Rainbows grow by posting a review in iTunes. If you send me a screenshot of your review, I will send you a $10 Amazon gift card. Just send the screenshot to grayingrainbows@gmail.com. So let's talk about Africa, since I know that is is it Africa or is it travel? What is it that really lights you up?
It's Africa. Because if it's travel, I actually am a bit of a chicken when it comes to traveling. But for some reason, Africa is an entirely different category for me. And to be clear, it's sub-Saharan Africa. It's where you find the majority of elephants and primates and antelope and so on. Once you move further north in Africa, you lose a lot of that. So it's that deepest, darkest Africa where all the wild things are.
So would you like to tell my listeners a little bit about what your company does?
Yes. Wild Rainbow African Safaris is a safari company that we guide, or I should say I guide, private safaris for groups of, I've had as many as 20, but I think the best group size is around 8 to 10 people. I've even guided 1 and 2 individuals before. Each safari is created and or curated with you. We don't have any set date or set itineraries that I could just plunk into an email and send it to you. So how does this look? I typically will have a conversation with you over the phone or through a series of emails to find out exactly what is it about you and this trip to Africa that is meaningful to you. What are you drawn to? Is this a childhood thing? For me, I grew up watching Sunday Night Mutual of Omaha's Animal Kingdom, and Born Free came out and all of that. You know, what is your draw? Now, if the listener is thinking, oh, that's just too much work, I don't want to have to do that. I really would rather just get on the line and find an itinerary and sign up. And that might be the perfect thing for you. However, if you have certain expectations around what you think your trip is going to be or what you want your trip to be, the personal touch that we provide is the key, the thing that enhances your experience of Africa. I've had many people say, oh, we went to Tanzania and we went with company so-and-so and it was a great trip. Man, we didn't stay any place for very long, and there was often a language barrier, and I didn't quite, understand some of the things we were seeing. And, we had to deal with a big group of 20 some odd people, and one person's taking photographs and the rest are needing to go to the bathroom or whatever. and, you're not getting the full experience. And what we provide, or what I provide by my being along on the safari with you, is 21 years of experience and 11 years of guiding for me. I am a certified guide with South Africa and South African, called the Field Guides Association of Southern Africa, and I've also done guide training in Kenya. You get my 21 years of experience to East and Southern Africa, and oftentimes guides that are working on the ground, it is their life and their passion around showing you their country and so on. And I don't ever want to take that away from any of my guides that I'm working with. So what I do when I'm with my guests, we always have the local guides that are driving the vehicle, and they know all the right spots to go to. What enhances the experience for both the guide, myself, and my guests is that we all get to work together. I don't ever try to take anything away from the local guides, because especially if they're Black, African, usually men, they have their own stories about growing up in Kenya, for instance, their customs, Kenyan customs, the national parks of Kenya, and the political history of Kenya, and so on. This is something that I feel I don't even have a right to speak about, but I do have an Americanized opinion that might work perfectly in the storytelling. However, once we get out in the bush, he and I can work together to create a full and well-rounded experience for our guests. And we work together to make sure everybody's needs are met in terms of getting the right picture of that lion cub versus can we get a little closer because then I can't quite focus on the eyelashes of the giraffe. And by the way, how tall is that giraffe and what's their gestation period and so on. And why are there habits that they have? And oftentimes, this is certainly not my way of taking anything away from the knowledge of my brothers in the industry. But oftentimes, because of my experience of being all over East and Southern Africa, I have stories that can help round out knowledge of a certain animal and information to help explain the entire ecological experience that the guests are having. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is painting a picture of their experience of Africa so that they could take it home and use that very same experience in their life at home. And that might leave listeners, and it does leave guests scratching their head going, how does my Africa experience stay with me when I go home? Well, you've got your pictures, but there's going to be one day, and this is one of my favorite things. I had a guest from California once who came out, and every time she saw a bug, and those of us from the South know this, that when we see out of the palmetto bugs, some of us call them roaches, palmetto just makes them sound nicer, we stomp them. The first thing we want to do is just like splat and clean it up with a paper towel.
That's okay in your house, but it doesn't make sense out in the bush.
Right. Well, that's where this guest was going. She's like, well, I could do that in my own house. I don't want to do that in my house. And I said, well, wait a minute. When you go home, I want you to take a second look at that roach or beetle or butterfly or some people stink bug, which is really a shield bug. What is its role in nature? What did I learn about it? Why is it here? What significance does it have in Alabama, or if you have a listener from Utah or somewhere, or Australia? You said you have some listeners in Australia. So before you even, without thinking, step on it, maybe you'll hesitate. And then next time you'll grab a piece of paper and a cup, you'll scoop that thing up and take it outside. I want people to leave with an entire ecological understanding, which includes human relationships. So that's why I like these guys to talk about their country and our entire relationship, because there's not a difference between human lives and human culture and nature lives and nature culture. It's all one big picture, which could, of course, lead to a conversation about the whole global experiences that we're having now. But nature plays a huge role in that. And this guest of mine told me that when she got back to California and a beetle of some sort was in her house, she didn't get the piece of paper and the cup, but she got her partner. She didn't stomp it. She got her partner to escort this thing out of the house. That was my success. That's why I was on that safari, because I had a personal victory, and this person looked at her life, in this case a bug, in a different way.
So you've been doing this now for 21 years. Is that right?
My personal experience of Africa is January. It was 21 years. My company, as of July this year, 2019, we will be 15 years old.
So what do you see for the future? You going to be a little old lady guide someday, or?
I hope so.
I mean, is that your dream? Is your dream to do this for as long as you can?
My dream is to do it for as long as I can and to provide as many people as possible with nature and bush experiences that does cause a shift in them and they take it home. We're working on some more immersive type safaris now, meaning backpacking might cause somebody to go, ugh, but something where we spend a little bit more time out in the bush without a vehicle. Hopefully an overnight experience for some people. Some people would call that extreme adventure. Others would be like, only one night? You're kidding. Something that sends people home as an ambassador to Africa, but an ambassador to nature and wildlife. Also working with a friend to do some corporate leadership training in Africa, which would be kind of cool. We'll see how that goes. But right now, our focus is on comfortable, privately guided luxury safaris and changing people, changing lives one person at a time, one safari at a time.
So are your groups predominantly women, or what's the most common sort of makeup of your groups?
Originally, my safaris did have a predominance of women and all gay or all lesbian. Now it has become very mixed. I'd still say that we are over 50% LGBT guests. And just for any listener out there, that I have had a couple trans guests, which was super cool. And we could also just say that everybody is just as ordinary and normal as the next person. But I just wanted to put that out there. And I've had family. I've had 2 family trips. My youngest guest is a 5-year-old. And my oldest guest has been an 81-year-old. And it's very mixed, gay and straight. And the families, by the way, were both heterosexual families.
But I know when I talked to you when I was first coming out a few years ago, one of your advices to me was to do some traveling, which I actually haven't had a chance to follow through on yet. Obviously, it's good for people to know that this will be a place where they could feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I did do a lesbian-only trip once, and then my dream trip, and the gay boys listening might get a giggle out of this, but my dream trip is to have an all-gay male group of men with me. Something tells me I might be the butchest one in the group.
I think I know who I need to get you connected with.
It would be so fun for me, but that's really kind of tongue-in-cheek. But I love taking anybody to Africa. I enjoy it, yeah.
What's your website?
Oh, my website, thank you. It is wildrainbowsafaris.com.
Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close, Jody?
After my dad died, I went through a rough period, and a friend of mine called me one day and said, Jody, when I lost my second parent, somebody gave me this advice, so I'm going to give you the same advice. I said, well, what is it, Rebecca? And she said, yes. I said, beg your pardon? She said, yes. I said, is that the punchline? She said, yes. And I said, could you share a little bit more about where you're going with this? And she said, for a year, I was told to say yes, no matter what I was invited to do, no matter what anybody asked me if I liked oysters, say yes. Have you ever been interested in walking barefoot across a volcano? Yes. You know, the most absurd questions. Would you like to go to the opera, knowing full well that you have no interest in the opera, or so on? Just say yes, because you have no idea what the answer yes can bring to you. Saying no closes off all possibility of anything happening, shuts it down right away. But if you say yes, you at least have the opportunity to think it through. Going through with it down the road doesn't matter, but saying yes helps you go through the process of considering whether or not to do it. And her encouragement to me was to go ahead and go through with it. So I did. For a year, I said yes to everything. Well, now I just tell anyone I'm talking to, whoever asks me for advice, I just say yes. What have you got to lose? Just say yes.
That is great. That's perfect for the end of our conversation. And I hope we can talk again soon. Let's not make it every 2 or 3 years from now on. It seems like that's been our current rate of talking to each other. So thanks again, Jody. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Absolutely. Well, I'm honored that you considered speaking to me, and actually we've made it to this point. So thank you so much. I'm excited.
I've actually been trying to get Jody on one of my other podcasts, Books and Ideas, since we first met back in 2013. To be perfectly honest, during that safari in South Africa, I had a big crush on her, and I continue to be inspired by the way she follows her passion. I've never forgotten the advice she gave me about how to meet someone new. As you might imagine, she recommended travel. So if you have a trip to Africa on your bucket list, please consider Wild Rainbow African Safaris. Jody leads every trip herself, and everyone is welcome. If you wanted to go on a LGBT-friendly group, you could even let her know, or a mixed group, whatever you wanted. Also, although I'm not getting a commission or anything, please do tell her that you heard about it here. If you were traveling solo, you'll also be able to be totally honest with her about what you need. If you're new to Grain Rainbows, I want to remind you that all the episodes of Grain Rainbows are available on our website at grainrainbows.com, as well as all the popular podcasting apps. You can send me feedback at grainrainbows@gmail.com or submit voicemail at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. You can interact with other listeners on our Facebook fan page, the Grain Rainbows Facebook fan page, or you can join our private Facebook group. Regarding the private group, when you submit a request to join, you're going to be asked a few simple questions. These are designed to keep out trolls. Your answers can be brief, but if you don't answer, you're not going to get it approved. There are a few people hanging out there right now because they haven't ever answered the questions, which is why I'm bringing it up. So I'll be back again in a couple weeks with another episode. In the meantime, I hope you will check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back with you again very soon. Grain Rainbows is copyright Virginia Campbell, MD. You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grainrainbows@gmail.com.